Welcome to another episode of Corporate CPR, where we breathe life back into your organization, projects, and processes, giving you insights to recovery and avoiding corporate mortality events. Today, we will be talking about how not being a good negotiator might be killing your company. And joining us to contribute to the conversation is Chip Massey and Adele Gambardella. Gambardella. Welcome.
You're so close.
Both of you.
It's a hard name to say. Don't feel bad.
Oh, it's beautiful. Well, Adele, why don't we start with you? Can you share a little bit about your background?
Sure. So I am a crisis communications expert. I have started my career as a journalist at George Magazine, so John F. Kennedy Jr.'s publication. So I'm totally dating myself for people who don't know what that is. I started there, then went over to some big daily newspapers, most notably USA Today, and then had to pay off my student loans from school, and being a journalist just was not doing it. So I went over to the dark side, went over on Madison Avenue during the .com boom. Again, dating myself, but launched some major .com brands. Some of them are still around today, including eBay and 1-800-Flowers.com. And then did that for a while and started my own agency, and had that for 15 years and worked with, and then I've been working with Chip for the last 5. So it's been a lot of fun, and we're really just enjoying our work at the convincing company.
Excellent. How about you, Chip?
Yeah, so I was a special agent, hostage negotiator for 22 years for the FBI. I started my career in Washington, D.C., where I worked at that field office, and I was primarily working espionage cases. We were tracking down spies and identifying kind of people that have infiltrated intelligence organizations and to kind of figure out ways and methods that they were pulling out information and getting to sources. So after doing that, I transferred to the New York field office, where I led the New York field office hostage negotiation team. So, and then after I left the FBI, I retired, and I joined Adele not too long after that in her business. So,
excellent. So I'd like to start at the hostage negotiation and bring that back to business. From my understanding, hostage negotiation is one of the toughest units in the FBI to get into, and that hostage negotiation is really challenging. In the life, or I guess the evolution of how that's happened. From, say early 50s to where it is today has changed quite significantly. What are some of those kind of key things that make hostage negotiations so difficult, and kind of how do you what is transferable to the business side?
Yeah, well, Jana, you've done your homework. That's really good. Exactly right. It's come a long way. The person that we attribute to making it what it is today is Gary Noser, and he wrote that book, Stalling for Time, and he was the one that was at Waco, and he knew that there was a better way to do it. We modeled our law enforcement kind of method of looking at hostage negotiations from various police departments, specifically the New York City Police Department. And then we evolved after that to develop more kind of scientific approaches to how to do it, because it was no longer going to work with, hey, we're the big bad, law enforcement entity. You've got to do what we say. Well, that didn't work so well. And so we've come a long way in understanding that this is really more about, I am going to convince this person. That's what we say, Jen, is that I never negotiated with anyone. My job was to convince that guy in that room with a gun to somebody's head to value what I valued, and then to move him along a continuum of, let's say he started out with, look, I want $1 million in a jet. And I got him to the end of that point saying, I want my life, I want to value life, and I'm going to surrender to you. Now, what happens in between those two polar opposite things are all about convincing that person, because I was never going to say to that guy, tell you what, you got 7 people in there, you kill 4, give me back 3, call it a day, right? Wasn't going to happen. My job was to get everybody out. So there was no win-win. There's no BATNA involved in that. There is one real solution to this, and that's everyone survives that day. But it takes convincing. There's multiple strategies to do that. What's interesting for, I think, perhaps your audience here is that when I and Adele met, Adele started saying, you know, I think there's some discipline overlap here. And I bet there's some things that would be so profitable for a business standpoint. And we talked about, and Adele spent countless hours interviewing me about my techniques, the strategies, you know, what I learned at Quantico as a result of my experience and in the field. And she distilled it down to a point where it was something that we knew the business world needed and would want. And so this was all about developing convincing strategies, about ways of how do you handle stress at extremely high levels? How do you make critical decisions better, more informed? How do you lead a team in a way that encourages every person to bring out their best? And how do you deal with difficult people? So we've done a lot of work in that, and I'll let Adele answer the rest of that.
Yeah, so I just think, you know, obviously when I met Chip, his experience is insane and so interesting, right? I mean, tracking down spies, like being in charge of hostage negotiation teams, like that is not something you see every day. But then when we started talking, we realized how much of what we did, me as in crisis communications and as a publicist, was really about getting people to believe what we wanted them to believe, to move them to where we wanted them to go. And I will tell you what, I did not know the skill set that Chip brought to the table. I did not know about active listening in the way that, you know, you've probably heard about it, right? And what we realized was like active listening is great in hostage situations, right? Like active listening is super important when you're trying to de-escalate someone, right? Like to get them from what Chip says is from a 10 to a 5 to a 1. And he knows how to do this expertly, right? And it's like in business, you're not going to run into that many instances where a person's going to be heightened to that degree where you're going to have to de-escalate them. So we thought we've got to come up with a strategy that's more about how you can deal with the person on a day-to-day basis, but make that person feel really valued and listened to. And so that's when we came up with the term and concept of forensic listening. And I'll throw it back to Chip to describe what forensic listening is.
Yeah, and this is going to be, I think, really helpful for your audience, Jenna, because, you know, it's something that we recently taught at a international bank, and they were so impressed by this is that they said they're going to use it nationwide. So the idea of forensic listening is really the umbrella of everything that we do, and we say with that is that words leave clues. And so with forensic listening, what you're doing is you're going to get to that person's unstated narrative. And here's what we mean by that. The unstated narrative is that idea, that thought, that process that somebody has in their mind about you, your company, what you represent, your product. And it's what they really think versus what they will tell you in person to your face. And that is the disconnect. And there's reasons why we don't say exactly what's on our mind to every business person that we meet, right? There'd be blood in the streets. We don't want that. We need to be able to get along. So what we do is we kind of hold back, we pull back. We don't always say exactly what we think. Well, here's the thing. Imagine the advantage you would have if you could get close, at least a little bit closer than your competition, to what your client, the person that you are presenting a proposal to, what they really thought and believed about you, the product. What were the holdbacks? If you got just a little bit closer than everybody else, you'd have that much more of an advantage. And so within that is a concept within forensic listening. And more broadly, forensic listening is what we're saying is both an art and a science of how you listen to somebody. And it's the idea is that after you've had that conversation, you can go back and think about what are the things that were important. And so what we suggest, Jenna, is that people take notes in a regular way. You need notes for next actions and what they need to follow up on. But you also should take notes the way we've described, in a way multiple companies and banks are now using, is this idea of the 4D quadrant. And we suggest that people divide up a page on like where they're taking notes, maybe top corner, something like that, into quadrants. So make 4 parts. And in the top right, you would have the idea of what is their theme. So often we're in meetings and the meeting, like say, is about employee engagement. We're trying to work out ideas on how to get our employees engaged. But it seems like the person up front, the supervisor, the CEO, whoever, seems to be talking more about the idea that we're not hitting our sales targets. So we know that while they're saying engagement, they actually are really focused on, we've got to get to the bottom line here quick, guys. So that's one. The top left is going to be about what was their emotion that they were presenting. Did he seem like very excited when they were talking about employee engagement, or was it more on sales? And if you loop that together with that, and then you move down to the bottom right, and the bottom right is their voice. So what was their voice like? What was their pitch, tone, and cadence? Were they up? Were they down? Were they rapid? Were they slowed down? Did it seem overall that if you connected those 3 things, that you would get a more clear picture? And you will. And the 4th quadrant, bottom left, is going to be their body positioning. And what we mean by that, and we're differentiating that from body language, is that body positioning is the idea that we're all active and in constant motion as people. We're not just static. So it's not just that we sit there with our arms folded. We're going to move around. We're going to gesture. We're going to move our legs and feet, and we're going to blade and move around like that. Now imagine this, if you're in a conversation with somebody that you're hoping to increase that relationship, make it better, get them eventually to sign with you, and you were to use this method as a means of understanding them better, and you will 100%, I can guarantee this works. You will absolutely get to know that person in a better way. And let's say this, after you've done this 4D quadrant and you've taken some notes and you pull out one thing that person seemed to be very concerned about, 2 weeks later, a month later, you go up to that person, and we call this targeted validation. And you go up to them and say, hey, Mary, I just wanted you to know that what you said at that leadership meeting meant a lot to me. I remember specifically the 2 things you said that good leaders do. And I want you to know I wrote that down and I've implemented some of your ideas already. And I'd like to share with you what those are. I mean, I don't know about you, Jenna, but the amount of times I've had somebody come back to me and validate me like that and said, hey, I just wanted you to know that you've made a big impact on me in this particular, that almost never happens, right? We're always hearing the bad news. We're always hearing where we're falling short, what we're not doing. But this is a process of so understanding that person. And you'll get to a point where you really know that person to a degree that you know how they want to present themselves to the world. It's like they might be Bob from accounting, but Bob from accounting has a dream. And he wants you to see him as, somebody that's advancing the world of finance. And he wants to be on panels. There's so much more to get from somebody. Anyway, that was a long explanation of our IP there. So.
Well, there's a lot of depth I want to go into, but I guess maybe before that, just to kind of set the tone. So you've talked about the 4 Ds of forensics listening, but is there an overarching framework around negotiation and kind of convincing people? Is there steps that you move through? Can you frame it up at a high level for us first?
Absolutely. So there's been 40 years of social science research that shows us how we convince someone of something. But we've updated that because we think, in today's world, it's just different, right? We have less time and less focus. So, but many of the principles are still the same. And, I've been in communications for over 20 years. The way I was always taught to convince someone was with the inverted pyramid, right? With the most important information up front, the who, the what, the where, the when, and the why. You get to your point, you get to it fast, right? Like that's how journalists write articles, and like the less important information is on the bottom. And what's interesting about how you actually convince someone, it is the, in fact, opposite of that, right? You almost have to like flip the pyramid completely. And you have to, instead of starting with your strongest point first and falling into what we call the saga of your own righteousness, right? Where you come out with your strongest point, you have nowhere else to go, right, Jenna? I mean, you have nowhere else to go if you start with your strongest point. So instead of starting with your strongest point, you start with your point of agreement. And what does that point of agreement look like? Something you both can agree on. You both like have a non-judgmental view of it, right? And then you move people down what we call the convincing continuum. And you move them down the convincing continuum by testing their certainty on the topic you're talking about. So like, if there's something they're certain about, absolutely certain about, what your job is to create FUD, fear, uncertainty, and doubt about what they think they know about that topic. But you have to do it slowly and methodically, and you do almost have to write out talking points on each of the ways in which you're moving someone down the continuum. And then now here's the discipline. Most of us want to take it all the way to the end, and we want to convince that person with all our information, all our facts, all our stories, all our everything. We're going to throw it at them because we want them to throw their hands up and say, you're 100% right. I've never actually thought of it that way. Almost never happens, right? So that's the things of fantasies. So instead of that, what you do is you take someone and you give them just enough information. We call this the convincing cliffhanger, so that they want to go and research what they are not sure of. You're giving them maybe a website to go to that you've preloaded with content. You're going to give them just enough information so that they are going to go convince themselves after you've presented just enough information to get them to unfreeze their cognitive biases that existed when you first started talking with them. Sounds complicated, but it really isn't. It's start with that point of agreement, figure out what they're fearful of about their own ideas about something. What are they uncertain of? What do they doubt about their own convictions in something? Because not everybody's 100% sure of something. And then to plant that mysterious, like just enough where the person wants to go, I need to know more about that, right? They want to close that open loop, because any super smart person needs to close that loop, or they're just not quite satisfied. And Netflix has done such a great job of this, right? That's why that like next episode loading up, right? You like never move from your couch because they give you just that teaser at the end where you kind of have to go to the next episode to find out what's next. But yeah.
Well, so maybe let's try frame it in a little bit of an example. Let's say you've got two project managers who both want to lead a project, right? And they both think they're the best at that. And they, and let's say there's nobody who can override, right? They have to work it out between them. So how is that? What does that process kind of look like then when, that's very personal, right? Going back to like, if you were probably documenting the themes, you would probably start to hear themes of why it's so important, and why they're so much passionate about it. Maybe their career, they feel like it's the next step of their career. So how are you working through then this inverse pyramid, I guess you could say, of I want to convince you why I should be the project manager on this project?
I think it's so astute of you to go back to that forensic listening quadrant when you're thinking about how to do the convincing continuum, because when you are loaded with lots of good information, you can pull out what is that thing the person is saying to me. And so with project managers, I know, project managers can often be very overwhelmed. They have just tons of different things that they're doing, right? They have a lot of different projects they're managing. Maybe this person in one of the meetings said, I'm a little overwhelmed. My plate's a little full right now. And so with the project manager who heard him or her say that, they might go back to them and they say, we can both agree that your plate is really full right now, and it might be better that I take this project on. I know that, then focus on the fear. I know that you don't want to not be in this project, so maybe I'll bring you in certain intervals where I know your expertise makes more sense. And maybe that uncertainty, I want to make sure that that, you're a really important member, you're a really important colleague to me, and I value your opinion, right? That's the uncertainty that they have. And what's the doubt? That they doubt that, like, that person, the other person maybe doesn't have their best interest in mind. And they can say, even before we insert the project or give the whole details about what's going on, I want you to review it and have your stamp of approval on it so we can all feel good about it. And then the convincing cliffhanger might be something like, let's see if this really makes a difference in our company going forward, and how this will really impact the projections for this year. Just something to go, and let's go do some research about that. Let's go see what that outcome's going to look like. And again, you're moving them down, right? They're now not feeling self-conscious. They're not feeling like you're going to maybe take their spot, that, you're trying to get more plum projects than them. They're feeling good about you now, right? They're feeling good about the situation.
What about, one of the things that comes into play with, and it could in this situation, but just in general, you obviously have a broad spectrum of personalities, and some people operate in a more emotional state. And sometimes it's hard to get them to even hear anything. Do you have instances like that? And talk a little bit about how you move somebody to a state where they're actually even being receptive to hearing anything, not even agreeing, just listening.
Chip,
Well,
this is you.
I think one of the concepts that we often overlook is that we're dealing with humans. We're dealing with emotions. We're dealing with people that have daily struggles that we know nothing about. And so what we always advise anyone that we're working with that is having difficulty with either direct reports or general leadership issues is we ask is, how well do you know these people? How well do you know that person in your life that is, seems to be in conflict with you or just is a natural agitator? So what we advise again is that you do one of the things we note in our book, Convince Me, is this idea of pattern of life, is that you recognize where that person is in their world. Like, what is like the number one thing that seems to be on their mind when you're talking to them? What do they repeat? And after you get to that point, you're also noticing what time of day are they most approachable? Some of us, when we can't think about engaging anybody until after coffee and after we've had some time to sit down and compose ourselves, right? But maybe that person is more of a PM person. And you notice that, after they've had lunch or around 2 o'clock in the afternoon, their natural kind of body chemistry is more receptive to ideas and being talked to. And that's when you can really make inroads. It's in the times when those people want to be approached, when they're most receptive to you. But so much of the time, when we're in our own head and dealing with our own calendar, we're like, okay, I know that I have meetings out the yazoo. So at 9:15 is my open spot. That's when I got to talk to Doug. But Doug doesn't want to hear from you until 2 o'clock. But if you recognize that he's, very frustrated in the mornings, but more receptive in the PM, well, that's when you do that, right? That's when you can start to make inroads. And there's a ton of other examples, but yeah.
Yeah, but what about, let's say it's actually more around the topic, and I'll give you a more genericized maybe example. Like, let's say there's
Okay.
a project and you have to pull somebody off the project, but it actually has nothing to do with them. But for whatever reason, they look at it as a personal failure, and you can't get it through to them that it actually had nothing to do with them, that really had to do with administrative stuff that was outside of the control, but they're just dead set that they failed, or they're not wanted, or they're whatever, like that kind of emotional being wrapped up in something. So like, how do you break into, through those perceptions when you've got somebody who's got very strong beliefs and they just won't even listen?
Yeah, I mean, I
Well,
think one
go
of the
ahead,
things,
Adele.
I'm sorry. Yeah, one of the things we talk about is this idea, are you an emotional convincer or you're a fact-based convincer, right?
Mm-hmm.
And so depending on who you're dealing with, the person, how they want to be perceived, how they want information to come to them, you should present it in the way at which they are most comfortable. So like, if they're a fact-based person, then you want to come to them with this personal thing with facts about why they're being moved off the project, stats, research, some kind of data that can back up why you're making this decision, because that's what they feel comfortable with. That's what they want to be, how they want to be received. On the emotional side, that person wants you to tell a story about why they're not on the project, about why, about how it's not about the impact they make on the company, but how just the fact that this company needs to make this decision at this point, right?
Mm-hmm.
But it's more of an emotional argument, right? You just have to know who you're talking to. I think that's one of the biggest things. I mean, most of us do not adapt our style, or as Chip's saying, our patterns of how we're talking to people based on what other people need. We do it based on our own needs, right? Like, it's like, I've got that 9:15 slot. It's open. I'm going to approach them then. It's like, that's not the time to go to that person.
Mm-hmm.
That is not the time. It's not going to work. And there's also all kinds of studies on like neuroscience about how if you have a complex thing you want to talk to somebody about, you never want to talk to that person about it in the late afternoon, because at that point, their brain is exhausted, they're tired, and they're not going to be as receptive to something late in the afternoon, because I think it's like something glutamate. I think with my Jersey accent, it sounds really bad, but it's like glutamate in your system, right? And you have too much of a buildup. And so if you wait until like way, way, way in the afternoon, after they've been working really hard all day long to present them with a big, difficult, complex problem, you're going to get a bad reaction from anybody because they're just not able to process it. But if you have something that's kind of an easy, kitschy pitch kind of a thing that's sort of fun and creative, then that might be the time to do it, because they want a mental break. It's just, there's so much in how our brains work, and really doing what Chip said, which is that pattern of life. I mean, most of us do not do this. We do not pay attention to people in the way that we need to in order to be effective. We just use the same strategies we've been using all our lives. And if we don't get the results we want, we just go, yeah, that person's a jerk. We don't like them. Yeah, they just don't like us. It didn't work out, when maybe you just needed to adjust your style a little bit to their needs.
As you talk about timing and the art of timing and that type of thing, it's funny. There's the book of Esther in the Bible, which is not a book that I think is really like it's not one of the ones that's talked about a lot. But one of the things that I took away that I thought was so fascinating about it is, Esther wants to plead for the lives of her people to the king, and she's bold, and she steps up when she doesn't have an audience with him, and that could mean she gets killed, right? And so he pardons her, or whatever the term is for that, and says, well, what is so important that you want? And she invites him to dinner, right? And so she invites him to dinner, and they have a dinner, and he's like, tell me what you want. And she's like, oh, I just want to have dinner again. And like, and like, it's this buildup of, maybe it's building that relationship, building the rapport. We don't know necessarily all the conversation that happens, but it isn't till the second dinner that she then says, hey, your right-hand man over here has just put an edict that's going to kill all the Jews in the country. And I just find that so fascinating. One, the patience, right? To draw that out and to understand when's the right time to say it, because I would think most of us would feel very panicked and be like, oh my goodness, I just got to get it out and, get out and say, this is what I need, like, don't let my people die. And yet, you know, she's drawn it out over multiple days, maybe even weeks, I'm not sure, because she understands what it's going to take to actually be heard.
Mm-hmm. There it is. There it is.
Yeah.
But something else you're saying, you're talking about us not shifting our styles. And I was going to ask, so then if you are a person who is maybe more, like for me, I'm very fact-based, very logic, like, yeah, here's the things. I'm not a storyteller. I'm not a like paint the picture visionary or type of person. How do you flex your style? How do you learn, you know, little tips to kind of be like, this is the person I'm talking to, so this is the way I need to approach them?
Yeah, well, I have kind of a funny story. One of my girlfriends really wanted to buy a Mercedes SUV, right? She wanted to buy this so badly, and she had hit a certain milestone in her business. She knew she could afford it, and her husband was super fact-based, and she went to him with a total emotional argument. She's just like, "I'd look so good in it. It's my favorite brand. I've always wanted this Mercedes. Come on, can I get it?" Right. And he was like, "No, it's ridiculous. We don't need that car. It's fine." And then so she comes to me and she's like, "Adele, what do I do? Like, I really want this car." And I was like, "Well, you're approaching him all wrong. He's a fact-based dude. So why don't we go look up some information about this car and see what we can find?" And, you know, we went, when we researched, and we found out it's Mercedes has the best luxury resale value on the market, and it's the safest SUV you could buy. And it's got, you know, airbags in places others SUVs don't. And it's like, we went through this like list of very practical reasons why she should buy this car. And he was like, "Okay, fine." Because she approached him in his style. And that's what you have to do, right? You have to adapt a bit. So if it's something you're not comfortable with, you know, try it out, test it out at home, test it out on friends, you know, see what kind of reaction you get in different situations, and flip your style a little bit every once in a while, and you'll see great results. And what's interesting, Jenna, is, you know, most of us already have built in by age 6. There's this study called on in judgment and decision making. Most kids by age 6 understand supply and demand. They understand you know, all kinds of really complex negotiation and convincing skills. I mean, I have 2 kids who are 9 and 11, and I'm telling you, they're masterful negotiators, masterful convincers. And I just think most of us are just going to stay where we're comfortable. We're going to just keep hitting the same things we've always done. And Chip, do you want to kind of talk about how to get out of your comfort zone a bit?
Yeah, and that's it. It's about trying these new techniques, like Adele was saying, in kind of lower level stakes.
Situation. Yeah, yeah.
Right. So you don't want to try out this, you know, a new convincing strategy when you're going to ask for a raise or promotion, right? You want to have that at a lower level when you are maybe discussing with your spouse on, just like Adele said, about getting a car, or, you know,
Dinner plan.
right,
Dinner
you
plan.
know,
Yeah.
yeah. And because these things, if used correctly, they are wonderful ways of getting to somebody's, you know, what it is important to them. What is it that they value? What is it that is something they want to be known for? And that's the idea, is to try these things when it's the stakes aren't so high, and then get comfortable with it to the point where you're using them and it's just like breathing, because it truly is a way of getting to know that person better and demonstrating that actively there with them.
Well, let's talk about this a little more at scale, like, you know, convincing and, you know, an organization to change. And where my head even actually went was back to the beginning, where you're talking about how the FBI had to make a significant pivot in how they used to do hostage negotiation, to really going from, you know, for use the colloquialism, kind of guns a-blazing type thing, to
Right.
no, I'm going to actually convince and have an outcome that is it's a zero-sum game where the FBI wins it all.
Right.
So how does how do you convince, at scale?
Adele, you want to go from the one to the many?
Oh, sure. I mean, I think how you convince at scale is this idea of really focusing on what is the group hoping to achieve, right? And so it's really about understanding what the group's unstated narrative is, right? And every group has it. They have, and it's not necessarily the vision or what people say is what the company culture is. It's more subtle than that. And so again, you're observing. It's about situational awareness, right? Like what groups form inside certain meetings, who influences whom, like where are the power dynamics in the organization, and how do you use those power dynamics to your advantage? Most of us are just going through work one day at a time. We're not looking at the structure of power dynamics. And one of the things we do in our training, and our training is called Training So Good It's Criminal, is we put people in group situations in really like what would be considered a high stress situation, like a hostage negotiation. Chip teaches them everything, in a thumbnail sketch, what he was taught at Quantico, and then he throws people in the hot seat, and they have to act very quickly as a team, and they have to work off of each other's energy, and they have to work with each other's crisis style, and that's different for everybody, right? And so this group of strangers, like 6 people, get together and they start to have cohesive back and forth about how to solve a problem they've never encountered before, which is a hostage taker who's a role player who they have to talk down in this live role-playing exercise. And it is amazing how this group just comes together so quickly. And so there are power dynamics. There are power dynamics among strangers. There are power dynamics in your office culture, in your company culture. And it really is up to you to be observant enough to know what works and what doesn't.
Were you going to add something, Chip, to that?
No, not at all. One of the things that I was thinking about when you said that, Jenna, the intro question to this was, there is a real difference when we did the research for our book, Convince Me, that between how men and women work in a group setting. And here's what I mean. In a persuasive kind of task, let's say there is a meeting that has been scheduled to talk about, which approach we should take to bring to company X. And there's probably, 1 or 2 candidates that are really going to try to position themselves as the thought leader here, as the one that's going to, champion the day with the boss and have the best idea out there. Well, here's what we found out was that a lot of the time men are more given to prior to that meeting is to have these little talks with other people on the team. And all right, you're not in agreement, Jenna. You've seen this, right? And they'll go around and they'll discuss, hey, I think I've got something. What do you think about this? I want to pitch this idea. Are you in favor of that? And they will gain support already in advance of that meeting. So they know going in, when the boss says, okay, who's got ideas? He already has 5 people that are going to turn to Bob and say, yeah, we know he's going to say something because he's already talked to us and we're excited, right? Now, let's take the point of Alice. And Alice is the hardest worker in the office, right? Alice comes in early. She stays late. She's the brightest. She's the most capable, and she's got great ideas. But Alice hasn't been programmed like a lot of the men to go around and get that kind of collaborative mindset going. She says, I'm going to keep my head down. I'm going to do the work, and they're going to notice me and my ideas because already I just try so hard and I work so hard. The boss is going to see that. Nope. because she goes in without any support. She hasn't done the groundwork ahead of time. So,
Yeah.
so what I think is fascinating about that is that it's simply a matter of taking the extra step. Now you have to deprogram yourself, right? For somebody like Alice, she has to deprogram herself to think that, well, if I just do a good job, no, not it. That's not going to save the day. Because we know through our studies and understanding so much of literature out there is that women are so reticent to raise their hands and say, I have an idea, because they want to get all their facts together. They want to have it 100% down. They don't want to have any, there is no room for error for them. The imposter syndrome is so huge. Whereas men just say, hey, I've got something I'd like to, float out
Run it
there.
by you.
Yeah. And it has, and it could have zero basis in any of the facts and statistics and promise that Alice has, but they just went ahead and did it. Right. So there's a lot to that, in terms of getting a group understanding, laying the groundwork for that. But so much goes into that.
Yeah. And I think with some women though, I mean, I've definitely seen the research, or not seen the research, heard similar to what you're saying though. But, like for me, I'm all about sharing ideas. I have no problem, but I relate to well, we just talk about it in the meeting. I don't have meetings before the meeting, like you're talking about, versus my husband, who we work together in the business, is he goes around and he's talking to everybody. And it's funny because I will have said something in a meeting, like I'll have maybe even done an entire presentation and nobody really gets it. And then all of a sudden my husband will say it, and I would, that's an amazing idea, 6 months down the line, because he has all these side conversations, and it's not like he's trying to take the credit or anything. Him and I are on the same page. We're just trying to push the same agenda. But people don't hear it until he says it. And I think a lot of it has to do because he has all these side conversations where I'm in the meeting person.
Yeah, and another thing that women don't typically do is we don't validate people because we're not taught to do that, right? Like we're not taught to do that. Coming up, it's like, there's a lot of competition. It's like, I want to be the prettiest. I want to be it's like, right? It's like there's so much competition. Girls are set up socially and culturally to compete with one another and to compete with everyone around them, that when we get to work, we're also competing, and we're competing to be the best, want to be perfect, right? There is a little bit of that perfectionism that I think more women feel, because there is only maybe one seat at the table for a woman in an executive role and in a big company, right? There is only one seat. So we know, we're the only ones there. So we really got to work hard to keep it. And I think what I've seen, especially, as I'm 49 years old. Oh my God, I can't believe I just said that. But I'm 49. And I will say that, like, being older, I'm a lot more comfortable sharing what I know with younger people, because I'm trying to send the elevator back down. When I was like 30, I was not giving anybody any room for anything in a meeting. Like, it's like, I am here. This is my spot. I'm going to be the best. I'm not going to share my wisdom with anyone. And I think that happens a lot. And that happened to me throughout my career. My mentors only showed up when they were just about to exit the company. And they're like, hey, so, I know you're going to be in that position. Let me throw you a couple pieces of advice. I mean, I just think women are just a lot more protective of their position. And they don't validate other people around them, because they think that that's going to make them look bad. And it won't. It actually has the opposite impact, right? Just validating everybody to make them feel good.
No, that's fascinating. One last question I have before we go to wrap up. Something that you were saying before about, finding themes and the unspoken, what did you call it? The
unstated narrative. Yeah.
Unstated narrative. One thing that was coming into my mind, because I often think about what's behind what somebody's doing. What are they really after? But one of the things that, at least I know in my relationship with my husband, when I've done this before, is that I sometimes put on him narratives that aren't true. So in trying to find the unstated narrative, I have I have put on to something that just really isn't there. And so how do you protect yourself from those biases?
Mm, really good question. And I think that's it, is that you are always striving to get to know the person. And you also have to keep in mind where you are likely to land when you are assessing somebody else. So, for example, one of the things that we do in the FBI is that whenever we conduct an interview, we always have another agent with us. Now, there's a couple reasons for that. One of it is for testimonial reasons. You always want to have a witness for, should this case go to court, that you have somebody that was there that can also testify, yes, in fact, that's what happened. I myself will testify to that. So you have corroboration. The other part of that is that you have a person that you can, after that interview has happened, is that you can now go back and what we call a hot wash. And that's when we go after actions. We're going to talk about everything that happened in that interview. And one person is assigned, the idea is not only is a person taking notes and a person asking questions, but one person will also be watching intently on that other person, the person being interviewed. And the reason for that is because we're looking for the subtle clues and for the differences and the nuances where they attach emotion or reluctance or they're being vague on certain statements. You want to be able to tie those together a little bit like what we were talking about with forensic listening. We also use that other person, Jenna, as a check against our own preconceived notions. So whenever we might rush to a conclusion, and say, well, absolutely, they're good for this because, I just got a sense that they were being evasive. And they're like, they weren't being evasive there. They were just terrified, because you were pressing them and you were talking to them about the number of years they could serve in prison if they were a part of this and didn't admit to it.
I don't think you'd want Chip as an interrogator for anybody.
Yeah, we don't ever want to be in that spot, right?
But very effective.
But that's the thing is that when we have somebody else to check against what we believe, it's very hard to do it on our own, right? It's very hard to be like, well, I know I don't have any prejudices. Well, of course you do, right? We're human. We've got them. So when we have somebody to keep us in check, and if you can run, when we're talking about a significant other, a little bit more difficult. But what you want to do in that case, when it's a one-to-one and you don't want to bring in other people, you just want to say, listen, I feel like you want to do that formula that I feel when you because, right? It's that 3-step formula. I feel when you because. That will open up the conversation. And you'll say, I know whenever I talk about, getting a new car, like Adele was saying, you just get angry and because you don't want me to have something nice. And it's like, that's not it. It's not it at all. I'm just concerned about finances. And I just want to make sure that because my background is that, I didn't always have that money and I want to make sure that we're secure. See that the difference is there. So when you are open, when you can share openly, this is what I'm feeling, about this particular topic. What do you think about that? Am I right? Am I close? Ask for the feedback. Yeah.
Well, this has been great. I'd love to hear what 3 things you want to leave top of mind with the audience.
Sure. So one of the things is just remember who you are trying to convince. Are they an emotional person? Are they a fact-based person? I think that's super important. The other thing would be, listen intently in a way that you can revert back to time and again and make that person feel really connected and like you deeply understand who they are. And lastly, I would say, try new things. Don't be so stuck in, in what you've always done, because, there's such great opportunity in trying some new things.
Anything, Chip, that you would add?
I would just add on to what Adele said. And I think it's remember what a a teacher once told us, who was prominent in neuroscience, he said, always remember DITME. And it says, do I matter to you? The guy's name is Jeff Hurt. He's brilliant. And the idea there is that, really nobody cares about what you have to say, what you believe, what's important to you until they feel like you care about them. And then you can cross chasms with that person when they feel like you have their back.
Excellent. Well, how can folks find out more what you do and get in contact with you?
Sure. So go to convincingcompany.com and check out our book, Convince Me, on Amazon and
There it
Barnes and
is.
independent bookstores everywhere.
It's awesome. Well, thank you so much for your time.
Thank you. Pleasure.
Yeah. And to our audience, until next time, keep your organizations healthy.